No, Cookie, I don't think Nikki Haley should get out of the race and pave the way for President Trump. Oh, hey, everybody. Welcome to the first episode of JL's Book Club in 2024, where we don't talk about Fight Club, because I didn't read Fight Club. Thank you for the yawn, Cookie. She's already bored. And by the way, Cookie, thank you for that pre-review massive fart you did. It really delayed our production time. Anyway, guys, before we get to the books of the month, we have a new beverage sponsor for this month, and it's Palm Wonderful Antioxidant Superpower. Haven't tried it yet. Hear it's good. Can't find pomegranates, so I said, let's try this thing. They advertise it enough, for Christ's sake. Palm Wonderful. Now, we've got two books this month. Almost said week, but new year, new me. The first book is called Mountains Beyond Mountains by Tracy Kidder, a male. Okay, use the proper pronouns. Tracy's one of those names like Pat, and ironically Kelly, which I remember going to an interview with a Kelly, and I was dating a Kelly, and I showed up and a bearded man greeted me, and I said, what the hell? What in the name of old Irish names is this shit? So this is Mr. Tracy Kidder. Now, the reason I bought this book is from 2003, which I didn't know when I bought it. But I had read an obituary a couple of years ago about the subject of this book, Dr. Paul Farmer. And he had a pretty prominent obituary in the New York Times, and I was just reading it, and much like inspired by the movie Coco, sometimes I get this weird metaphysical thought where like, but if I read someone's obituary, it's like they live on. And I read, and very quickly it became clearly relevant to me because he was a major medical figure, and specifically in Haiti, where he had set up a massively successful clinic called Partners in Health. And it turns out when I read the review, it mentioned this book as a sort of top-tier, well-reviewed biography of the man, but he just seemed like sort of an extraordinary individual person. I'm guessing the reason a movie hasn't been made about him yet is because it might appear to be a white savior movie. But as I always say, I understand the pushback on white savior movies, but guess what? Once in a while, a white guy is a savior. And this guy was an incredible human being. They often use the phrase colloquially, that dude's built different, usually in sports or to define somebody's sort of physical characteristics or intensity. This guy is truly built different, was built different. He was a sort of medical genius, which always helps, obviously. And he was just completely selfless in a way that is, if I had to compare it to something, I've often pondered in terms of when somebody says to live, as Jesus would want you to, how difficult that really would be, forsaking your personal glory and gains to help as many people as you can. This guy really lived that in an obsessive way. And the passage I'm going to read is sort of, without giving away sort of all the different stories in the book. So yes, like I said, it's a 20-year-old book, but it only came to my attention a couple of years ago. When I was in law school, I wasn't doing much reading other than homework and legal briefs and case law. But this is just a passage to give you from somebody else's perspective. Years later, Paul Farmer received this letter from a woman he wanted to marry. Lovely Pell, my inability to promise a life with you as your wife does not stem from a lack of love or deep, deep commitment to you. Indeed, as you probably know, I have not felt a serious ounce for anyone but you since 1983. My decision was based instead on trying to envision our life together, and I saw us not matching, the only way we didn't fit. For a long time I thought I could live and work in Haiti, carving out a life with you, but now I understand that I can't. And that's simply not compatible with your life, the life you once told me you would like to lead even 10 years ago. You pointed out to me once during an emotional argument that the qualities I love in you, that drew me to you, also caused me to resent you, namely your unswerving commitment to the poor, your limitless schedule, and your massive compassion for others. You were right, and as your wife, I would place my own emotional needs in the way of your important vision. a vision whose impact upon the poor and the rest of us can't be exaggerated. I was lucky to meet you when I was young enough to feel as though I have always known you, and lucky to have been hugely influenced and loved by you. In the end, I hope you know that as part of my histology, I don't know what the fuck that is, you can never be replaced. Her name was Ophelia Dahl. Now, the reason I just included that last name, Roald Dahl's daughter. This guy was banging Roald Dahl's daughter, the BFG. It was, that letter sort of sums up who he was, like from somebody that was very close to him, like his first sort of love. It is reading this book, and the author does a really good job of sort of exploring his own opinions, kind of inserting him into the story for the purpose of letting you know how intense an experience it is to be in this dude's presence and to like travel with him and see his genius, his compassion, his like maniacal intensity when it comes to doing this work. And, you know, you sort of realize we need more people like this, but people like this just are very rare. It's an inspirational book. It's sort of sad as I'm reading it, realizing, you know, like a decade after the afterword, he passes away at like 62 or 63, so not old. But like if we all had a decent fraction of this guy's sort of ability and willingness to give his own life to make hundreds of lives better, we'd be a better world. But we have, I feel like, fewer people like this now. And maybe their stories aren't being told, but it's a pretty incredible book and a pretty incredible story. It just makes you realize, how can I put this artfully, how fucking useless most of us are. But it's a book that will, I don't even know if I could say this book like it will touch you, because this guy feels like you know, Michael Jackson or Michael Jordan or somebody else named Michael that did amazing things. When you sort of just go, this, you can be inspired, you can donate, but like people like this are incredibly rare. And I guess if his example can lead people to do a little bit more, that's a good thing. But you also you read about somebody like this and you go, yeah, this is somebody who there should be movies made about. Like, this is somebody whose story should matter and inspire people. And I just thought the author did a very good job of, instead of just chronicling it as like, I'm a passive observer on this ship telling his story, it's more like, by telling you how it impacted him, experiencing this guy's intensity, his occasional temper, his kind of unceasing energy to do good, and self-sacrifice. And he was also blessed with sort of an incredible intellect and capacity to do this work. So it's like you're taking somebody with an incredible set of skills and then an incredibly unique character. And what that one person can do is pretty crazy and pretty great. And it's obviously a major loss that this person is no longer with us. But you know, I have a Patreon, so I'm doing my part to make the world a better place. But yeah, obviously recommend this. Mountains Beyond Mountains. Inspirational, but not in a sort of schlocky sort of way. Sort of in a real brutal, intense, inspirational kind of way. So there's one book, but we have a second book this month, guys. New year, double the books. And this was a recommendation at the inception of the book review show, so it's been a while. And Tanya W., a longtime fan and charter Patreon member, recommended a book she was reading at the time called All Blood Runs Red, The Legendary Life of Eugene Bullard, Boxer, Pilot, Soldier, Spy. Not to be confused with Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, which was a fucking boring movie based on a John le Carre novel. And the cinematographer here is laughing because she has a close friend named Taylor, and sometimes when she'll mention that name, I will just say Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. And that's why it's annoying to live with it. living with a comedian, I think, is sort of like the useless version of the intensity of what it must be have been like to love Dr. Paul Farmer. It's like, I'm doing no good, but it's still a very intense experience. But this book was by Phil Keith and Tom Clavin, or is it Cauvin? Just kidding, it's Clavin. And this is sort of, it's kind of, I didn't realize how these books would sort of fit in a weird way, but it is sort of two inspirational kind of stories. This book, this fella, Eugene Bullard, if I were to say what this book feels like, and I mean this as a compliment, it feels like I was reading about a real life Forrest Gump if Forrest Gump were black, not special needs, and had a temper. And it is, at first I was reading the book like, okay, this is like a nice story. I don't know if this is the best book I've ever read. It feels like a nice story. Like it's an interesting person in history that I was unfamiliar with. Okay, this is nice. But as I got into the book, the authors, I felt like this is one of my things I try to always figure out with biographies is, is the author understandably falling in love with the subject? Am I still getting kind of an objective look at this person? Or is it like after 3 years of researching all the good things and interesting things and obstacles a person overcomes, do you just kind of go, he was fucking awesome, the end? That was one of the things I often thought when I read Grant by Ron Chernow, which I loved. And I'm not casting aspersions on his writing. I was just sort of like, well, Grant seems pretty awesome. And are we sure this is like completely kind of historically unbiased? And it's more a question. It's not that I think it was or wasn't, but you get to the end of an 800-page book and go, I'd fuck Grant, he seems awesome. And you sort of go, was he that awesome? Or did you fall in love in the 6 years it took you to make this in-depth great biography? But I felt like as this book went on, it didn't become, I think the term is hagiography, where it's just some sort of long statement of praise. And his temper was one of the things that I found obviously very relatable, but also, hey, yes, some stories he lied about. We can't verify some of the stuff. Why would he have embellished? Maybe he embellished for this. But the broad strokes of his story are still very amazing and very telling. That he escaped the South. He was the son of a slave, son of a former slave. And I related to his dad. His dad was like 6'5", 240, but like in 1910. That's like Shaq in today's adjusted weight and heights. And he ran away. He dreamed of going to France. That was like his big dream. And he ends up spending a lot of his adult life in France, where he became a boxer. And then he fought in World War I and World War II for France before even the U.S. had entered the war in World War I. He became a French war hero, the first African American fighter pilot. And then he ran a saloon, which was eerily very similar to the plot of Casablanca, where he would give tips and information on Nazis who were hanging out in his nightclub. And it was one of those things where, after the 1940s, he started to realize France was reverting almost to an American posture. But for decades, the reason jazz artists and writers and celebrities of color, also known as cock, if you're going by the acronym, went to France, because it really lived the values of fraternity, what was it, égalité, fraternité, blah, 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 liberté, whatever the fuck their French snooty catchphrase is, because it really was colorblind and accepting of all sorts of things. And it was when Nazis and Americans showed up, they were like, hey, fella, what are you doing over there with that white lady? Why are y'all mixing and having fun and not shitting on the colored folks? So it was a very interesting broad capsule of that time and how much France validated his dreams by really being sort of a racially neutral land of opportunity for somebody like him. And that's why he was in 2 world wars fighting for the French, because he felt that genuine patriotism that sometimes an immigrant can feel over somebody who's native born to a place. But the passage I want to read from this book. So my point is, good recommendation, Tanya. I started early on in the book, I was like, all right, it's an interesting story. I don't know if this is going to be like some great piece of writing. But by the end of it, I was very invested and really thought they gave as full a picture as was possible from archives and records and his own unpublished memoir. I'm going to try and cut a little bit out of this, but this is towards the end of the book, but kind of sums up America in a weird way. That same year, Dave Garroway was a 46-year-old television host at the height of his fame. Every weekday morning, the enormously popular program The Today Show, headquartered in Rockefeller Center and entering its 9th year, placed him in front of and had him heard by millions of Americans. Those who watched and listened, and apparently this guy did not have like an office where he locked the door behind him so he could sexually assault his coworkers. Those wouldn't be installed till generations later. Those who watched and listened saw a bright, beaming, ebullient man who projected a positive energy about life in America. Only a handful of his closest friends and associates knew that Garroway's broadcasting success could sometimes be undercut by the chronic depression that he had suffered his entire life. Unhappy events could make the depression worse, and Garroway was, in 1959, coping with such an experience. Then they talk about how his close friend was the guy who cheated on the show Quiz 21, which was the basis of the movie Quiz Show. So that I'll just skip that part to speed this up. Garroway was devastated by the news, not only with concern for a friend, but by proxy for his own show, which Van Doren had co-hosted many times. It seemed like Today and Garroway were being tarred by the same negative brush, although they had nothing to do with the 21 debacle. At 7:30 a.m. on Wednesday, December 16th, Garroway and his producer were rushing for the elevators at Rockefeller Center, headed upstairs to the Today Suite for a production meeting. The men stepped into the elevator number 3, the one manned by Eugene Bullard that particular morning. Garroway had a certain casual familiarity with the friendly, bespectacled colored man in his neatly pressed Rock Center uniform. They had ridden up and down hundreds of times over several years. Garroway had also grown used to seeing Bullard's uniform decorated with one bauble or another, usually a pendant of some sort festooned with a multi-hued ribbon, much like a military decoration. He automatically and wrongfully assumed that these doodads were membership badges for some fraternal organization or another, or perhaps commemorative pins for one of the many colorful Negro marching bands or societies that were popular in Harlem. As usual that December morning, Bullard greeted the popular host with his patented smile and a cheery hello. "Good morning, Mr. Garroway." "Good morning, Gene. How are you?" "Fine, sir. Just mighty fine. And you?" "Excellent," Garroway responded automatically without a second thought. Something was different that morning, though, and the fine-tuned reporter's sense that Dave Garroway had so carefully nurtured over the years was tinkling little alarm bells in his brain. Bullard closed the doors and moved the levers necessary to start their ride up to the Today floor. Garroway had subconsciously noticed that the operator was wearing a new medal on his jacket, and one that seemed vaguely familiar to him. The pendant ribbon was singular, bright red, and suspended from it was an emerald green laurel wreath, and below that a striking Maltese cross, accented with more laurel branches and a circle circumscribing dual French flags. It was dazzling, quite beautiful really, and in the back of his mind Garroway thought he knew what he was looking at, but equating what he believed it might be with the modest man beside him working as an elevator operator didn't quite make sense. Squinting, Garroway began, "Gene?" "Yes, Mr. Garroway?" "What's that you're wearing on your uniform?" "Why, it's the Legion of Honor, Mr. Garroway. It's France's highest decoration. I was awarded the medal just a couple of months back." Bullard beamed slyly, knowing that he was creating the exact dumbfounded expression in Garroway he had hoped to inspire. "How did you—" Garroway caught himself. Where he was headed was, "How did you, a seemingly undistinguished black man zipping up and down in an elevator, probably earning not much more above minimum wage, get such a decoration? Did you find it in a pawn shop?" Fortunately, instead of being so condescending, Garroway paused long enough that Mr. Bullard began to fill in the blank. "I was in the Great War, Mr. Garroway, and the Second War, too. I fought at Verdun, among other places. Flew combat, too. Shot down a couple of Boche planes. I did." Now, they go on, and eventually he becomes a guest on the Today Show and has a little moment of fame, kind of resurrecting his great story. But to me, it was such an embodiment of how fucked up America was. Not the Today Show host in that case. He was actually very nice and helpful in asking, questions that would have been normal even for good ones. But it's the idea of this guy was like a legend in France because his own country wouldn't allow him any opportunities. And then after this sort of heroic Forrest Gump-esque existence, and just to point out, Forrest Gump, on the other hand, like, you know, owned various companies and part of Apple stock and met 3 presidents and whatever. Obviously, it's a fictional story, but it makes the point that this guy, Eugene Bullard's existence, ends kind of as an elevator operator until he gets a little reprise and a moment, 15 minutes of fame, because it's such a unique, funny story. But it's like there's a lot of tragedy there too, because that guy shouldn't be working an elevator, period, but let alone after all he had done, and just like that's the best he could kind of get in this country after all he had done. So it was a really good story, a quick read. I read about 100 pages of it in one day just waiting for jury duty. So yeah, also good recommendation, Tanya W. I appreciate it. And so if you need some inspiration and some history, I think both of those books will do you good. So next month, as we all know, is Black History Month, or as we call it in this house, Half Black History Month. Now I promised Aaron that I would do the Lincoln book. It's not happening for good reason, because I bought another book that I have to read sooner. That will be later in the year. Another fan recommendation, Lincoln on the Verge, but it will be done this year, probably in the summer. But for Half Black History Month, we're going to read 2 large biographies. So we got a lot of train trips coming up, a lot of travel, and a lot of time to read, but I'm going to be spending all my free time reading. The first is King, A Life, a critically acclaimed biography. It's about 550 pages. That's the first book. He was, as I've been told, apparently looms very large in Black history in America. I can't wait to find out more. And the other one is Magic, which is about Irvin Magic Johnson. This got a really good review like a month or two ago in the New York Times, less than 2 months ago in the New York Times book review. It's like 780 pages. So we got a lot of reading to do, but I always thought, when you think, one name black icons for Half Black History Month, you think King and you think Magic. And King Magic, I think, is the new show with Charles Barkley and J-L King on CNN. So, just kidding. So that's it for this month. Hope you enjoyed it. And look forward to these 2 books, these 2 biographies for Black History Month, coming at you probably on the last day of February. Thank goodness I have a leap year day in February, because I'm going to need every freaking day to read the 1,300 plus pages I've got to read to give you guys the content that you want. So thank you. Have a good February. And remember, books, they're like documentaries for smart people.